Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, where we will discuss converged secondary and primary storage, and it's brought to you by StorageCraft. Before we get started, I'll cover a few reminders. This webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link in a couple of days in an email so you can view it on demand. Also, this webinar is interactive, so you can get your questions in using the Q&A widget on your screen, and that's located right underneath the slide window. We'll get to as many as we can, and if we don't get to your question, we'll be able to follow up after the session today. Also, we do have an attendee chat, so dive in and have a conversation with your fellow IT pros. All right, well, let's get started. Our speaker today is Sean Darrington, Senior Director, Product Management at StorageCraft, and he comes to us with over 20 years of storage experience. So, Sean, with that, I'll hand it to you to get started.
Great, thanks, David, and welcome, Spice Heads. Thanks for taking the time out to attend today. I've actually been the green guy for Exablocks prior to StorageCraft acquiring Exablocks years ago, 7 years ago now. So it's been a great ride working with a lot of you. And today I wanted to kind of share with everybody what we've been doing over the last, actually 2 years since StorageCraft acquired Exablocks, in really changing the way that storage is managed and information is protected in a converged secondary and primary fashion. So we'll get into some of those details, a little bit of setup, and then we'll get into some specifics as well as a live demo. But before we do that, there is one thing that I think everybody appreciates, and that's bacon. This is actually my home smoked bacon on the egg. It's always one of the good things that comes about from having a smoker like that is to reap the rewards of bacon, but also the opportunity to do things like a large prime rib bone-in. So that's another thing, low and slow. 225 is, it turns out just nice. So enough about meat for now. Let's talk about a little about some of the challenges that we're focusing on here. So everybody on the call has a lot of things that they're juggling in terms of how they manage systems and network and storage and data protection. But when you take a look at the things that kind of rise to the top of the pain points, and what we hear from a lot of customers is that it's really the unpredictable growth that they had to support changing business requirements. And there's certainly visibility into kind of the next 3 to 6 to maybe 9 months, but what about the next 12 to 24? And that's where the variable comes in, where scale-up architectures really oftentimes fall down because of the requirement for forklift upgrades if you don't get the guesstimation exactly correct 12 or 24 months into that life cycle. But then also just the overall cost of downtime for applications that you need to run your business, and the amount of time that you actually have to spend managing storage and manage the data protection can be time-consuming and so oftentimes complex. And so what do you do in the event of a failure that's local or an event that is impacting more than just a local failure? It could be an entire system, it could be a site. How does that business continuity plan come into play, and has senior management funded an appropriate strategy? So those are kind of things that we've been taking a look at here at StorageCraft, and as you take a look at where and how we're focusing on the data management problem, it's really on the growth of unstructured data. And yes, there's a lot of growth for structured data. However, the unstructured data tends to be more unwieldy. It tends to be less predictable. It also has changing requirements based upon the organization and based upon even multiple applications that within an organization that may have high performance requirements for engineering, CAD, CAM, file serving, et cetera, where these engineers are working on large, sometimes gigabit-sized files that they need to do and process quickly, as opposed to more of the lower performance requirements for archiving. It could be test dev, it could be longer-term archiving, it could be periodic access, like digital asset management for museums. They don't require the highest performance, but they require moderate performance with guaranteed data integrity. And so having the ability to understand how to manage that unstructured data, as well as be able to eliminate silos of stovepipe storage management, those are all things that we've been focusing on from a problem perspective, because when you take a look at the legacy architectures, this is what most everybody on the phone is certainly familiar with, and that is file protocols at the top there in terms of either block or file access to ones and volumes, right? That's the way that most of us have done it for the last 30 plus years. But there are actually some challenges with that traditional approach of having a block store and tying a specific one or a volume size and concatenating those to particular applications. And then what happens if one application grows more quickly than another? You're not able to actually right-size that environment. And so when you take a look at the benefits of a scale-out architecture, whether you're starting with 10 terabytes or 100 terabytes or 500 terabytes, you've got an existing capacity requirement today, right? And when you have a scale-out architecture, you can actually invest appropriately for what you need today with the appropriate capacity and availability. And you don't have to over-provision based upon a scale-up architecture of a small, medium, or large version, where you're over-provisioning at the initial deployment, but over time as you grow, certainly capacity and availability needs change. But with a scale-out architecture, you can simply add more nodes to the cluster, increase that capacity, have that provisioning be done non-disruptively so you actually do not have to reconfigure the application. Your backup application or VMware or your file serving archiving target, you don't have to create additional map network drives for your users. They just simply see more storage capacity that's available to them. And unlike a scale-up architecture where you may have to do a forklift upgrade if you didn't guess right in the beginning, even through that hardware life cycle of year 3, 4, 5, when you're ready to retire the initial purchase of a scale-out architecture, you simply evacuate those nodes and all the data is migrated to the new nodes in the cluster, and the applications don't change. The users don't know that anything has changed, but you unplug the old hardware. That's not the case with a scale-up architecture, right? You have to do a forklift upgrade for a hardware lifecycle timeline as opposed to even just some application changes in those timelines that may impact the availability there. So how do we actually do this, right? Scale is not something that StorageCraft invented. iPhone was obviously one of the pioneers early on, but some of those scale architectures are actually still predicated on block stores. They're still predicated on LUNs and volumes, and how do you do bin provisioning, or how do you have multiple 2 terabyte volumes for ease of management that looks larger to an application. Well, what we've done here at StorageCraft, and for those Spice heads that have been following us for years, you'll know that we actually have a distributed object store underneath the covers. So we are not built upon any RAID system, right? Our distributed object store is, just as you would expect, similar to Amazon S3 or Google Cloud, et cetera, where these are objects that ultimately are managed by us in an appliance and cluster form factor, but yet the difference is that we present file system access. So we look like scale-out network-attached storage, NFS and SMB file services, but as you write out a file to that cluster, as your users are writing that CAD/CAM engineering file, we actually break up that file into segments and do inline deduplication. We compress it, and then we calculate a hash of that. And that hash is now an object. And it's very different than a traditional block store, because with an object store, it can be really any size. And you can add and remove nodes, and you can add and remove devices, being disk drives in a node, and make that transparent to everything sitting above the addressable object store, right, the file system. But what we've also done, and this is really where the new age comes in for secondary converged storage, is the ability to have data protection services that are another access protocol, another microservice that sits on top of our distributed object store. So all of these file system and data protection services have equal access to the object store. So you can really think about this as a large pool of storage. And you don't have to worry about how many LUNs or volumes you're going to allocate to an application and have it be, siloed capacity allocation. Every application, every file system can have access to the entire storage pool. And that's very different than a traditional block store. There's a question that came in here about immutable. What is a persistent and immutable object? So the persistent and immutable means that once a file is written, that file is decomposed into objects, as I described. Those objects cannot be deleted by the file or by the user. And so they're immutable in the fact that if you overwrite that file, the original objects are still there, but a copy of the objects that have changed in that new file are now written to the object store. So it's a way to protect against ransomware, as an example, but also a way to understand, because it's a hash value, the impact of bit rot and other things where we are not actually susceptible to Uber or bit rot or bit flip, depending on terminology there, for information that we're going to be presenting back to a file system over some period of time. And that's very important from a data integrity standpoint, right? So in addition to the scaled architecture, we have the ability to protect against ransomware. So if a map network drive is infected and is in that the 1 terabyte of user data that's written to John's map drive is overwritten, we will write out all the encrypted files. However, all the original files are still preserved because of our immutable object store. So you as an IT admin can go back and get those files, or John can do a right mouse click Windows previous version and get those files back. We also have the ability to have a scale-out data management platform that supports not only just file serving, but also disaster recovery. So replication either to another cluster or to our cloud. We have the ability to support the global deduplication that's inline processing as well as the compression, and then in infinite snapshots. So every 90 seconds, we're taking snapshots of that data. You don't have to worry about scheduling it. You just have to think about how long you'd like to keep that. You know, a week, an hour, months, years, and we handle it all in the background. And because of our object store, all those snapshots are actually deduplicated against the primary storage. So there's a lot of benefits to this data management platform that includes not only the storage capabilities, but now we also include the data protection services. And those data protection services are really focused around service level objectives. And I'll get to the example about what those are and what that actually looks like, because we've done a number of things to improve how you can protect that data. But the software that I've been describing here is all running on obviously a hardware. And StorageCraft, we have multiple models based upon your business requirements, and based upon capacity needs and performance requirements. On the left-hand side is the 4412 model. This is a third generation model that includes 12 drives in a 2U form factor and up to 144 terabytes, supporting 12 terabyte drives there. And then in the middle is a 17-bay model. This 17-bay model is also a 2U form factor, and so you have up to 204 terabytes in a single node, a single one safe. And on the far right, you have the 5410. That's our all-flash. And this we support up to 3.8 terabyte SSDs. So you've got a very high-density all-flash node there for OneSafe. The same software runs across all three of these models. And so depending upon your needs, you can use a cluster of 4412s as an example in one location, and that can be replicating to a cluster of 4417s. You can also do the same with all-flash to hard drive based. So each cluster is either hard drive based or all-flash, but you can replicate and you can manage it the same way through one system. And that gives you a lot of flexibility to obviously right-size the performance and the capacity requirements that you need for your applications. There's a question here, what is the starting price of OneSafe? Well, so we actually have a unique model here at StorageCraft, is that we allow you to bring your own drives or your own SSDs if you'd like, and use that with the OneSafe models. Now on the SSDs, there's a compatibility list. There's also the opportunity for you to use different hard drives in either 8, 10, 12 terabyte capacities for the other OneSafe models. So having said that, the starting price point for the 4412 is actually $13,995, and the starting price point of the 5410 is $29,995. So when you're looking at the capacity of the 4417 and the 4412, you can think about a 3-year cost of Amazon S3 pricing, about 3 cents per gig per month, right? And we're taking a very simplistic model to licensing this, where you have the hardware, you have one system, replication, encryption, and data protection. So the 5 SKUs to think about based upon your needs. So having said that, with a setup about our architecture and what's different about OneSafe and what really is the Converged capabilities, I wanted to get into some of the specifics about what's unique about our SLA-driven and what does the Converged secondary solution look like. And so there's a couple of use cases here that I wanted to highlight, and this is something that StorageCraft is unique at, in that the same software, the same OneSafe solution can be used for either a Converged data protection solution, where we're providing backup recovery services across physical and virtual servers, You can use that same cluster or the same software running on a separate cluster for primary storage for virtual servers, right? The all-flash 5410 is well suited for mid-tier VMware workloads. At the same time, a lot of our customers that are using us for data protection, whether it be our own with either Shadow Protect or the OneSafe Converged, a lot of customers use this as a Veeam backup target or a Commvault backup target or backup exec, et cetera. And that is actually something that the data protection capabilities, having some number of shares for data protection capacity, a lot of our customers will just carve out a couple of other shares for unstructured data. And so that same cluster can actually be used for multiple purposes. Whether you're looking at doing agent-based protection or agentless protection, you can do that. Obviously, depending upon physical and virtual servers, you have a different approach to protect those applications. But we also have the ability with our intellectual property and some of the patents we have around our data protection is to actually recover that information nearly instantly. In fact, with virtual boot is the way to recover an application in literally milliseconds. And it takes less than a second for you to go in and recover a VM and have that VM show up in vCenter and begin to boot. We have the ability to do off-site replication as well. So whether you're looking at protecting applications locally or in addition to local protection off-site, you have that ability to define those data protection policies. And so the virtual boot that I mentioned is a way that we can instantly recover an application. And this is important in a couple ways. And you see the diagram here where on the local recovery, you're actually recovering in the production storage can be pure or nimble or take your pick of primary storage for VMware. It can also be another OneSafe cluster, an all-flash cluster, right? But the OneSafe Converged might be a second cluster. Having said that, when you do that recovery happens in less than a second. The Windows VM or Linux VM begins to boot. And when that happens, your applications can begin to immediately use it. However, what we have patents around is the ability to do that recovery in the background from the OneSafe cluster that's the target for those applications, recover that back to the primary storage, all the while the applications think they're still accessing the primary storage, but in reality, they're being redirected to the OneSafe cluster. And when that's completed, you get the notification, and the application continues to access the application as it has. However, now all the storage, that entire VM, has been recovered back to the primary storage. So there's no vMotion required as an afterthought or an extra process, additional application interruption. This is all done in the background for you via our virtual boot technology. Now, this is also applicable when you're looking at cloud-based recovery because you can actually recover in the cloud similarly, not quite as quickly, but if you're using our cloud and our DR as a service opportunities to recover data and network and application services, you can run all those applications in our cloud. Right? Now, at the same time, you can do basically a virtual boot from cloud back to your on-premises cluster, and the same thing will happen. Right? So depending upon link speed and the amount of data, that'll take time to move the information from the cloud down to the OneSafe cluster on-premises. But that same thing happens, and so the fail back from cloud to your data center happens much more seamlessly, and that's also something that we've leveraged within our virtual boot capabilities. So thinking about the data protection and the storage services, one of the things that you can think about, and this is a little bit different, is how do you view storage in a different light, right? How do you look at a new way of approaching storage management that is not looking at just a siloed data protection requirement or a siloed storage requirement for all flash or a siloed storage requirement for unstructured data, right? With OneSafe, you now have the opportunity to satisfy multiple requirements with the same software on just different OneSafe hardware. Right? So whether it be all flash or hard drive or primary storage, whether it be, as you see in the middle there, converged secondary storage, you can do that as well. If you want to have unstructured data in that same secondary storage cluster, you can do that as well, or you could have a separate cluster. But the way that everything is managed, the underlying technology, the advantages about what we do compared to traditional block stores is there in those multiple use cases. Right? And whether you're looking to replicate off-site to another OneSafe cluster or into Amazon or Microsoft for archiving, or whether you're looking to StorageCraft's cloud for full one-click DR as a service. These are all opportunities for the new age to look at a converged scale-out data platform. And that scale-out data management platform is for both primary storage as well as secondary storage. And so as we've looked at this, of really trying to unify how we can give you as admins as much time back as possible, we've thought about that from a management perspective. And so one system is the way that your storage is managed. And this is, it can be deployed in a couple different ways, cloud-based as well as a VM within VMware. But one system can globally manage any OneBlocks or any OneSafe anywhere, right? So OneSafe, for those that followed Exablocks for a while, OneSafe is the next generation software that OneBlocks has been rebranded. It now includes data protection capabilities as well as the additional storage capabilities that we've been discussing. But the OneSafe clusters can all be managed through one system, and that means that you get 7x24 alerts as well as StorageCraft. We're monitoring, and we know the status of all the OneSafe deployments worldwide, the state of every power supply and disk drive. And so as you look at this, and I'll show the demonstration here in just a moment, we've really focused on making it simple yet powerful. So most things that you can do are done in a couple of mouse clicks. There are no command line operations you have to know. There are some fallback if you need to do network configuration on the OneSafe. You can do that via console and through iDRAC or IPMI for remote data management, remote cluster management, I should say. You can do that via command line, but everything else is done via the One System UI through point and click, and you're done. Setting up replication is 3 mouse clicks, right? Setting up a data protection policy to protect 50 VMs is a handful of clicks, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. The other thing that we've done is that because we want to give you back as much time as possible, and our architecture of an object store underneath the covers, it gives you all the benefits of object store with none of the complexities. When you add nodes to a cluster, when you add drives to an existing node, if you have a failed drive and you replace it, or even if you don't replace it, all those actions are taken, all the remedies to that are taken without any admin interaction, right? So zero configuration when you add a drive into a node of a cluster. You just add the drive, any number of drives, and that's added to the pool of storage. If you're adding a node to an existing cluster, it's 1 mouse click, and there's no reconfiguration that needs to be done from the application perspective. There's no application downtime. So that's actually something that's quite different from most of the other ways that you manage your storage and the way that you actually look at managing data protection. This is something that is fairly unique, and you'll see here in just a minute exactly how intuitive and how straightforward this can be for a converged solution. But before we do that, I did want to circle back and share a couple of other pictures of this is 20 pounds of pork shoulder that's going on. This is the beginning of a 14-hour smoke. And then here, 2 briskets that are done. It turned out very nicely. This is a couple different methods, different rubs and so forth, but as you can tell, like having fun with the big green egg and the smoking there. So let's do this. Let's flip over to the live demo. Okay, 1 second here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Excuse me. So this is the dashboard for One System. This is installed in a VM. So with this converged data protection capabilities, we support VMware today. Hyper-V will be coming later this year. But if you look at the ability to manage your system for data protection but also storage, this is One System, and this is the way that you can do that. For those that appreciate a dark view or running Macs in the latest Mojave, you can do the dark view as well. I'm going to keep it in the light view just for visibility and the recording here. So at a dashboard view, we really have a high level about what's happening in my environment. Here I've got my overall system. The One System VM is healthy, so all the components that are making this happen are healthy. I don't have any unprotected virtual machines or physical servers today. Things are going well. Policies are being applied and run on a periodic basis successfully. And here's my protection status. For the 72 machines, right now everything is healthy. overall storage capacity utilization, and here are my two OneSafe clusters that are healthy. If I had alerts and alarms, they would show up on the dashboard, and then I can drill into and take specific actions based upon that. So based upon that, let's take a look at a couple things. So I'm going to look at the policies. So as I create a policy as an admin, I can define what type of policy I want to do, right? And so I have multiple policies set up here already, high, medium, low, etc. And you can see that at a high level, I can see which policy is protecting what number of machines, right? So my low priority policy is creating 38 virtual machines. It's taking a recovery point of 24 hours. It's doing a 1 daily, 1 weekly, 1 monthly, right? You can contrast that with the high priority where you're looking at 30 minutes, where we take a snapshot of all the data every 30 minutes, and you can see the retention period for that. Here's also an icon just so you can kind of see what's my local and offsite protection scheme. So these first three are all going to a OneSafe cluster, and this is the converged deployment model where the data protection services are running on the cluster, and there's a direct API call from VMware to the cluster. It doesn't go over NFS or SMB. It goes directly to the storage services running on the cluster. My highest priority policy is actually replicating to two places. It's replicating into StorageCraft's cloud, but it's also replicating to another OneSafe or third-party storage, depending upon how you set it up. But to create a new policy, you can just literally create this in a few clicks. So now I'm just going to decide how quickly I want to take my snapshots, and I'll do one every 15 minutes. And then I can figure out where I want to replicate this to, what storage destination. This hash value here that you see here is the container. This is for the storage services running on OneSafe. This will be cleaned up a little bit, but this is so a little awkward for the whole hash name. And now I just decide how long do I want to keep these recovery points. So I'm going to let's keep 21 dailies instead of 14, and let's do 5 weeks instead of 6, and 6 months. Now from here, I can decide where I want to replicate it to. Do I want to replicate it to another cluster, or do I want to replicate it to a third-party location? So here, let's do to an NFS, and let's also, the replication interval, I'm going to do daily replication. So depending upon my network, et cetera, I can do synchronous, or where it just replicates all the time, or I can do daily. So now I'm just going to click Save. So now I've just created a policy in a few clicks that I can apply to any number of virtual machines. So here, now I can take this. If I want to edit the policy, I can do that easily. But if I'm going to apply this to a number of machines, I'm going to look to my protection. So now we go out as part of one system, we discover all the VMs in your VMware environment, as well as any physical servers that you have the agents deployed on. And so now from here, I can filter if I have a specific host I want to protect, or if I want to look at selecting, I'm just going to select these applications here, these VMs. You can select individual, or you can do by sorting. And now I can see it assigning a policy. So that way that I just created the Spiceheads policy, I have a quick summary about what the policy is. So I don't have to keep track of in my head what the names of the policies are and what the associated retention periods are. I can see that very easily here in a thumbnail view, and so I can select Spiceheads here, and I can click Save, and now I'm done. And so now those are going to begin to look at that and begin to protect those machines. If I want to do a recovery, it's also very similar, where I can search a specific host, and let's do this. So these are all the hosts, the VMs on my VM002 host. So I can go in and do a recovery point of this one, and I can look at all my recovery points and where it's from, whether it be the most optimal, the local, or if it's a different location, depending upon if it's replicated or if it's on premises. You can decide what you actually want to replicate and choose what point you want to replicate it to, where you want to replicate it to, is it going to be in which data store, and am I going to make it live, right? And then that's it. So I'm not going to actually go through and recover this one, but that's how easy it is to recover that. And this instant recovery with Virtual Boot, this is what recovers in less than a second. So if you were logged into vCenter, you'd actually see that VM spinning up and booting in less than a second. Okay. Now on the storage side, so that's the SLA-based data protection. On the storage side, thinking about things differently here are the two clusters that I have in my environment. I have this one, the F877 and the P767. This one here, the first one, this is our all-flash. So as you look at the overall status, and you can see the capacity, whether you have a software update available, when you want to create storage shares from this cluster, it's very easy to do in a few clicks. So now I can just create another share, and again, I'll make this called SpiceHeads 2, and I can decide which cluster I want to create that on. And whether it be SMB or NFS, you can do so. And now from here, I only create a storage policy. I don't have to worry about what size LUN or how many volumes I'm going to try to create and allocate capacity to the share. I literally just create a share with a storage policy. This storage policy defines the data protection in terms of if is it deduplicated, is it compressed, but also if you're going to have snapshots disabled, or if you're going to do something custom where I'm going to set my snapshot retention policy to 3 weeks. So I'm going to take 90-second snapshots automatically, and I'm going to keep every snapshot for the first hour, and then hourly for the first day, daily for the first week, and weekly basically forever. But I just decide how long I want to keep that. I don't have to do anything else other than this. Now I click Create, and that share is now created, and I have my SpiceHeads 2 share that I can begin to use immediately. Okay, and you can just, this can be used for any SMB application, files, for file serving, for archiving, for whatever purpose. If you're going to do VMware, obviously you do NFS as that data protection. So that's as easy as it is to create a share within a cluster. Now within a cluster, I can actually begin to do other things. Well, actually, let me take a step back here. I'm going to go to the shares here, and I'm going to select SpiceHead and show everybody what we do for replication. So this is where I can actually set up remote replication in just 3 clicks. So now I have my source cluster, I have my target cluster, right? My replication share is SpiceHead 2 from this cluster to the next one. Now, assuming I'm on the same network and I don't have to go over any firewall or an external port, you just click Finish and you're done. And so in 2 clicks, I just replicated SpiceHead 2 to another cluster. And now from here, I'll see my recovery point, and I have a read-only share on another cluster. You can do bidirectional replication, you can do multi-site, many-to-many, one-to-many architectures, depending upon what you need to do from a business perspective. At the same time, the way that I can recover this is just simply promote this from read-only to read-write. And as of that last recovery point, in less than a minute, that share is now read-writable on that cluster. And so this is something that you don't have to do for every share within a cluster, because you're thinking about storage differently now, right? You're dealing with an object store, a pool of storage that you have different microservices, file system, and data protection running on. And each of those can have different properties. So if I have 10 shares in my cluster and I only want to replicate 3 of my most critical off-site, I can do that. I don't have to replicate everything. I don't even have to replicate to the same cluster configuration. I can replicate to different one-safe models. I don't have to have the same capacity in the primary and secondary location. The only thing that matters is if I have enough capacity on my target cluster. If you do, that's fine, right? So that's really a couple of things I wanted to share with everybody in terms of how do you create an SLA-based data protection policy? How do you assign it to a certain number of VMs? And you can, I did a handful. You can do it to, 90 VMs in a couple clicks, as well as how you create a share and you actually use that to replicate off-site for data protection. So that's as easy as it is for what we've done for managing storage. So I'm going to flip back here now to the slides here. We've got a couple questions that came in. So one of the questions here is there cloud-based access to this, or is it LAN access? So there's two ways to answer that question. The first is the one system that I was showing you is actually for data protection and storage management. We've reworked and redone what many of you may be familiar with one system. That's actually installed on a VM in your vCenter environment. So that's accessed via LAN. So the IP address that you saw in the browser URL, that is the IP address of the VM that as long as all OneSafe have access on the network to that IP address, then that's how it's managed. There's also a cloud-based management where it's onesystem.exoblox.com if you're just using it for storage. That is actually where StorageCraft is hosting OneSystem. You're accessing it over HTTPS, and you can do that. That's what the vast majority of our customers do. Now, over time this year, in the second quarter, you'll see that OneSystem that I was just showing you with the data protection and storage management capabilities, that will actually be in a hosted model. So it'll be onesystem.storagecraft.com. So that's the goal, and that gives you the most flexibility to manage it from any cluster, from any browser, anywhere. And then obviously StorageCraft, we handle all the updates and maintenance to that, and you don't have to manage that another VM there. Okay, so moving on. This is something that we do a lot of work with Veeam, as I mentioned earlier. So the same capabilities of the Converged data protection, if you're using Veeam, or if you're using a third-party backup application, you can still use OneSafe as a backup recovery target for that, right? And at the same time, that same backup recovery target can be used for other things as well. It can be used for primary storage for unstructured data. We have a lot of customers that use the combined backup and data protection, primary unstructured data, removing all the Windows file servers from VMware, and then having that have that run on OneSafe. At the same time, if you have a mid-sized company that has VMware and have capacity and wants the benefits of high-performance flash but don't want the price tag of some of the others, this is one of the things where the 5410 and 5210 models come into play, because a lot of the same benefits of the scale-out architecture applies to VMware as well, right? So you don't have to worry about how many LUNs you're creating for your NFS or iSCSI data store, right? An NFS data store in VMware can be the max that VMware supports, 64 terabytes. We don't have any file size limitation for data store, nor do we have a file size limitation for any files that are being written from a VM. So you can write a multi-gigabyte or tens of gigabyte file, and we don't care, right? As you scale out and grow over time, you can add multiple data stores as you need to, and that's all non-disruptive to VMware. You don't have to worry about thin provisioning or any of that. It just allocates another data store, and you can map n number of VMDKs to that. Okay. So the other thing that we do is because we enable customers to bring your own drives, is the question just came in as well. For both SSDs and HDDs, there's two options. If you bring your own drives, yes, you're responsible for returning that drive if it fails for warranty, or throwing it away and not doing the warranty, just buying another one. If you have a failed drive, the cluster will actually know that a drive has failed, and after a certain period of time, we'll actually begin to recover that drive to the other remaining drives in the node. You actually don't have to replace a drive, assuming you have enough storage capacity available, so you can bring that cluster back to health. Okay? If you replace a drive, that rebuild process will be even faster, and because we're object-based, it's much faster rebuild than a RAID set, right? As well as the performance degradation is a lot less, where you don't have that degraded mode of all the XORs being calculated on a 4+2 RAID 6 set. We do have different promotions, and from time to time, customers do buy the SSDs or HDDs from StorageCraft. In that case, we will actually warranty it and either do a next business day or 4-hour replacement of that hard drive based upon the support level that you have. And then we'll take the responsibility for the warranty on that. There's a question here about maximum storage. Today our clusters support up to about 1.4 petabytes of capacity in a 7-node 4417. And we have customers that have greater capacity requirements than that, and then they have multiple clusters, and they replicate that off-site. So it really depends upon your need, but you can start with a single node, and today scale up to 7 nodes in a single cluster. From there, we'll be increasing that number of nodes later this year to something greater than 7, most likely 14 to 21. So if you're an organization that has the multi-petabyte requirement, we can satisfy that as well. Okay. Next, the last thing I want to touch on here is the unstructured data. I mentioned a little bit about what we do with unstructured data, but the benefits of this scale actually have a lot to do with particularly file serving, where we have a lot of customers that free up the VMs by removing those Windows VMs that are doing the file serving, and really look to the OneSafe cluster to provide that. So we integrate with Active Directory, and you can have the same capabilities of deciding on a per-share basis, how do you want that application to be protected. Certainly we do encryption at rest as well for the entire cluster, but as you scale out over time and add more shares or grow from 70 terabytes to 300 terabytes, nothing is reconfigured, right? When you're looking at how you set up a file serving environment, you don't have to worry about running out of drive letters anymore when you're mapping your users, because you can have a single share for your users that's 100 terabytes, 300 terabytes, 500 terabytes. There's no limit on that, right? And as we integrate with Active Directory, you manage all the permissions the same way that you do through Windows properties. You can even do things along the lines of access-based enumeration if you want to hide the snapshot directory from your users and you want to have them submit a trouble ticket instead of recovering it themselves. But on a per-share basis, again, you have that flexibility to define how long you're going to keep those snapshots, which is particularly important as you look at protection against ransomware. This is something where, unfortunately, a number of our customers have been infected with ransomware, but fortunately, every single one has been able to get the information back. Christopher Rural Health, the CTO there, he was infected with ransomware, and this actually had all the patient medical records, which they use in the hospital, and it was replicated off-site. And all those shares were encrypted, but ransomware had actually laid dormant for a while, and so the replicas were also encrypted. But fortunately, because he was able to go back to the previous snapshots, he recovered that users, and they actually had a couple of users, shares be encrypted, fully recovered. There's another hotel in New York that was using us for file serving, was using Nimble for the primary storage for VDI, as well as using us for the Beam backup targets, right? Unfortunately, they were infected with ransomware that not only got the map network drives for all their VDI files, but it also encrypted the Beam backups. And the Nimble snapshots were all corrupted, couldn't get anything back from there. But he went back to our snapshots, and because they were immutable, he was able to get not only his Beam backups recovered, but also the file serving data. So there is a significant advantage to having an object store that is immutable to ransomware, in terms of not immutable, and the files will be written out if they're encrypted, but the original content will always be there. And because we are an object store, that original hash value that's written is compared to what's actually satisfied and read back and delivered back to the application at a later point in time. So if those objects don't match, we go to the other copy of the object that we have. So there are a number of things that we do from an object store and from a OneSafe perspective that allow you to protect against ransomware, have that confidence. It's actually something that is also helped, particularly healthcare organizations, underwrite their insurance policies. So based upon the number of medical records, there's a certain exposure, $1 per record. Having this protection against ransomware, having this replication off-site is something that can oftentimes help. And whether you're in the healthcare or other verticals, I know everybody is constantly thinking about how they can get that information back in the event of a failure. So the last thing, well, the two last things. Number one, for those Spice heads on the call, mention this webinar, and we do always have, for this webinar, we're running a promotion where we do have special pricing for Spice heads that have attended this webinar or listened to the playback later. So mention that to your rep, and we'll extend a special Spice head discount for that. And lastly, I'm just going to leave a picture of the delicious bacon one more time, as there are a couple of the questions that have come in, and I wanted to answer those. There's a question here on the protocols. So NFS and SMB, what about iSCSI? Yeah, so iSCSI is something that we're working on. I don't have a definitive time frame for that, but going back to that microservice architecture, you'll see the ability to add iSCSI shares to a cluster, the same thing as NFS and SMB or data protection services. And all those shares that you create will have equal access to the storage. Now, I should have mentioned that you can assign quotas to both SMB and NFS, so if you want to limit how much you want to allocate for file serving, you can do so, but you don't have to. So iSCSI is on the roadmap for that. Okay, just looking here to see any other questions that have come in. Nope, so that's everything I answered. There was a question here about Hyper-V for data protection. I mentioned that earlier. That'll be coming in the second quarter this year, and that'll be just delivered through a software upgrade. So great. Well, if there are any other questions, feel free. You can email me on the Green Guy and Spiceworks, or follow up. And thank you, everybody, for attending.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean, for your time today and for the demo. We appreciate that. And we also have special thanks to StorageCraft for sponsoring this great webinar today. So for everyone listening, I'd like to remind you that you do have the ability to view this on demand, so look for that link to come to your inbox. Also, we do have the winners of the contest posted in the attendee chat, so take a look at that. We'll also post that winner in our community in the contest page. And also check out the handout section before you leave. With that, I will thank everyone for attending today. We look forward to another partner webinar soon in the future. Until then, stay safe and keep it spicy. Take care, all.